I think I will start. All right. Thank you again for dialing in. We appreciate that. I'm Liz Powell. I am the head of G2G Consulting. Today, we're going to talk about accessing DoD funding and MHSRS, which is the conference coming up in just a month. It's actually right around the corner. So what I'll do is go over what we're going to cover today and kick things off. And then my wonderful colleagues, who you can see up on your screen, are then going to fill in a lot of great details for you. We welcome questions as we talk, so please post those in the chat box, and we are happy to answer those questions. Next slide, please. So this is what we're going to cover today. And we're often asked, can we get a copy of the slides? Is this being recorded? The answer is yes and yes. So we will make sure you have that. So we want to start off with a little bit of an introduction, give you some background on G2G, and then we want to talk about what's happening in Washington that is impacting biosciences and specifically bioscience funding, both now and in the future. We think that's really important for you all to know. We're then going to go over some key timelines, key government funding resources, with a strong focus on DoD and the VA in particular. Then we want to talk about this conference. It is the largest military medical conference that happens every year. Last year, they did not organize the conference due to COVID. So they're back this year. We're really excited about the opportunities to network, to meet with program managers, and to find out what are the priorities for the military right now and where they're dedicating funding. So it's a really neat opportunity we want to make sure you know about. We'll close out with some case studies and give you some tips and take your questions. And as I said, you can post them while we're speaking, but we'll definitely have time at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so G2G, what does G2G stand for? Government to growth. That is what we do. Government to growth strategies. We work with companies, institutions, nonprofits. And I'll give you my background before I talk a little bit more about G2G. I worked on Capitol Hill for several years. I've also worked on some campaigns. I'm an attorney and I have a master's in public health. A lot of my work has always been in health policy, but I've also staffed some interesting committees, which really broadened my background, and one of which was the Armed Services Committee. And I learned a lot about the different funding streams within DoD and saw what a huge chunk of the budget it gets. I've just worked on small business growth, economic development, a lot of different areas. And in 2007, I met a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, and some nonprofits that were doing great work, but they didn't know how to access funding. And that's where I got the idea of G2G, government to growth. I thought I could be that bridge and help these organizations and companies grow by working more effectively with government. So since 2007, I have been able to grow the team, and we are in a few different locations, as you can see, Midwest, to the East Coast, and we're bipartisan, and we have raised over $320 million in non-dilutive government funding for our clients. Many are in the biosciences, but many are not, far beyond that, in a lot of high-tech areas and nonprofits. We have done all kinds of policy, regulatory work, CMS reimbursement, which I know is a huge issue. Right now, we've got the breakthrough challenge that we are actively working on to close that gap between FDA approval and CMS coverage. We also produce a regular tracking system for all the grants that are coming out on health innovation. And my colleague Greg is the real expert on that, and he's going to cover that. We track all that's happening legislatively on the Hill, and John on our team is really the master of that, and he's going to go over some of those details. And then we track what's going on with the White House. We've got this new administration that's doing a ton of innovative things when it comes to patient-centric policies and new funding streams and ARPA-H. And Katie and our team is a real expert there, and she will share her insights. So we've got lots of different affiliations with bio chapters we work with across the country, and different defense health organizations, et cetera. So that's just a quick background on our team. Next slide, please. Well, I went over my background. So former Capitol Hill staffer who now runs G2G. Greg on our team, he can give his background. Greg, if you want to share that now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. So my background's entirely on the private sector side of things, inside organizations, working government relations, on the health and human service sector, and I've got some nonprofit management experience before I came to G2G. And while I'm here, I, as Liz mentioned earlier, help manage our government bioscience grants report, which is a daily tracking and then a monthly report that we issue that highlights and provides information on grants that are available during the month. And then we also piggyback that with a highlights call on the third Friday of every month. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So that's just a little bit about me. I've got a background or a master's in public administration. And Liz, I'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Greg. Next slide, please. So I'd love to have Katie and John introduce themselves.
Happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Collins. I've been with G2G for just about a year now and work on a lot of our health and bioscience client portfolios. I spent a good part of my career, really all of it, in Washington, D.C., a good part of that working in the Obama, Biden White House. I wrapped up my time during that administration as the policy associate on the White House Cancer Moonshot Task Force, which many of you may know. Then VP Biden started after the death of his son to really garner all the resources we have in our current scientific portfolio to fight cancer. And stayed on with Team Biden post January 2017, was the program director for the Biden Foundation, and then the Biden Cancer Initiative, which we set up to continue that focus on cancer and to drive some of those programs outside of the government that we'd started during the administration. And most recently, I was the director of policy at a small nonprofit in Washington called Act for NIH. We work to educate Congress, lawmakers about the importance of investing in biomedical research and how basic and translational research leads to cures, and to advocate for greater funding for the National Institutes of Health. So I'm happy to be with you all today, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, John, to share his background.
Hey everyone, my name is John Richter. I'm the Federal Legislative Director based in our Washington, D.C. office. I've been with G2G now for about just about 3 years. I have my master's in public administration. I started my career on Capitol Hill, where I spent about 8.5 years working both the House and the Senate. In the Senate, where I started my career, I staffed the Help and Finance committees for Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. I also worked on, I worked on healthcare issues there, and I also worked on veterans, science, technology, and telecommunications issues. And then I went over to the House side, where I was the staffer for then Congresswoman, now Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham of New Mexico, where I staffed the Budget Committee and the Oversight Committee, and I worked on defense, armed services, homeland security, telecommunications, healthcare, veterans, education, transportation issues for the Congresswoman. I also, when I left there, I went over to the American Nurses Association, where I was the advocacy and political specialist for the ANA. And then during both my time on Capitol Hill and most recently with G2G, I took leaves of absences from my jobs and went back home to Pennsylvania to serve as the deputy political director for both the Clinton-Kaine and the Biden-Harris campaigns. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you all. So as you can see, we've got an impressive team. We've got more folks on the team as well who just aren't speaking today. But what we'd now like to do is to delve in some details on what is going on so that you have context as we then talk about specific funding opportunities. So with that, next slide, please. I'd love to pass it back over to John, our expert as our Federal Legislative Director.
Thanks, Liz. So there is a lot going on Capitol Hill right now. The House and the Senate got back from their 4th of July breaks back home and are really trying to work hard to get a lot accomplished before they leave for their August break and go back home to their states and their districts. So some of the biggest things that they are working to accomplish in this very short amount of time is a large infrastructure package, the appropriations package, and the National Defense Authorization Act, known as the NDAA. I'll start with the the infrastructure bill, which seems to have the most life, and they're really trying to get this done. At least the Senate is trying to get this done before they leave. So President Biden has promised huge investments in our infrastructure, not only roads, bridges, but also rail, pipeline, clean water, broadband issues are all included, among a lot of others, into this plan. The House did pass a largely partisan bill that the Democrats were able to pass. The House and the Senate and the White House have been having really in-depth discussions on a bipartisan plan to move forward. They are still working on that. And they're hoping that they can get a breakthrough over the weekend, where they'll have, as what I heard last night from Senator Collins, at least 11 Republicans being able to support that after the weekend. Senator Schumer, the leader in the Senate, did throw up a test balloon yesterday to see if they can work through to start debate. That failed. No Republicans voted for it. But they're really hoping that by next Monday, they're able to really have that bipartisan deal, and they're able to move forward before the August recess. When it comes to appropriations, both the appropriations and the NDAA are delayed a little bit. The NDAA a little bit more because of the president's budget. It took a little bit more time because of the new administration to get the budget out, which delayed a lot of this progress. With the appropriations, it's important to know that congressionally directed spending has returned. It's also known as earmarks, is what the old name was called. And in both the House and the Senate. It's a lot more restrictive than it used to be. There's only a certain number of accounts in each of the bills that are allowed to have these earmarks. In the House, each member got only 10 for all 12 bills to submit. The Senate was a little bit more unlimited that they were able to submit. But it's really working on making sure that members are able to know what's in their district, know what the priorities are, and be able to bring some of that federal dollars back home to their districts for projects that are really important. The House is a little bit further than the Senate is on this process. The House has gone through almost all of their markups for these pieces of legislation. They've been able to get through the committee largely on a more partisan basis than normal, but the House is expected to vote next week on about 7 of those bills in what we call a minibus. So they'll attach all the bills, all 7 of those bills, 7 of the 12 together, and they'll be able to pass that on the floor next week. They probably will not get to the remaining bills until after August. The Senate is hoping to mark up in their subcommittee, 1 or 2, possibly 3 of their bills through the Senate subcommittees, but they will not get to the remaining of those bills or to a final passage onto the floor in the Senate until after August. After that, after all those bills are put together and the House and the Senate both vote, they would need to do a conference report and a conference bill to merge those together and then vote on an end of the year package. The government runs out of funding September 30th, so it doesn't give a ton of time once they get back. But they are really trying hard to ensure that these bills are able to be signed into law and that we don't have a CR, a continuing resolution. And then with the National Defense Authorization Act, again, like I said, it is a little bit more delayed than usual. The House and the Senate are going through their subcommittee markups right now, but they will not be able to get through them until after after the August recess to be able to get those fully combined and signed off. But that is another bill that has to happen every year. It's really what is the authorization bill for the Department of Defense. It decides what programs are authorized and at what funding levels they are authorized. So it is a very important program. And all of these bills are something that G2G has been working really in depth on. We know a lot of staff on all of these committees, and we've been having great success getting language for clients into all of these bills. I think we can go on to the next slide. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is Cures 2.0. Cures 2.0 is sort of the next iteration of the 21st Century Cures Act, which was signed into law by President Obama, which really works on improving how new drugs and medical innovations are research developed and delivered to these patients. The original bill was designed and drafted by Congresswoman Diana DeGette of Colorado and Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan. They were able to shepherd that large piece of legislation through a divided Congress and to get signed into law. It's been working extremely well. But there are some things that need to be built upon to make this work even better. So they have developed a Cures 2.0 version, which they have released a draft statement, and they are really still looking for input onto how to expand some of these sections. G2G has been in contact with both the Congresswoman and the Congressman's office on what we think needs to be included, but that is something that those conversations are still ongoing, and there's still a lot of time to influence what goes into this piece of legislation. One of the biggest things that it includes is President Biden's Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H. I know my colleague will get to that in a little bit, so I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what's in it. But it also includes some really key new funding for the NIH and the CDC for initiatives for health literacy, vaccinations, and pandemic planning to accelerate bringing some antimicrobial drugs to the market, advance some caregiver skill development, which is really important as we're talking about the sandwich generation and folks that are not only taking care of their children, but also their parents and sometimes even their grandparents, aunts and uncles. And then some translational research and development. There's been a lot of money spent through the NIH on basic research, but we need to make sure that that research is being turned into medicines and treatments and medical devices that can be given right to that patient, to those patients. I'll go over some key components of this bill. Like I said, it would require pandemic planning of COVID patients called long haulers who suffer symptoms well after being infected with COVID. It will expand Medicare coverage by making innovative new healthcare technologies accessible to Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries. It would increase diversity in clinical trials to ensure that new drugs are useful for all populations. Right now, a majority of the folks that are being included on these clinical trials are white, usually white men from suburban areas. And we need to ensure that there is a mix of rural, urban, different sexes, as well as genders and racial backgrounds to really ensure that that these drugs that are being produced are safe and effective for all those populations. It would require the FDA to improve upon the collection and use of real-world evidence and developing some new patient-focused treatments. It would expand, like I said earlier, the caregiver training programs. It would improve accessibility and availability of health information of patients so they better understand their illness and treatments. and would make telehealth services more accessible for Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP beneficiaries. This is a very long piece of legislation. I don't have time. We can have a whole webinar just on cures, but like I said, it is something that is still in development. So if there are thoughts on how we can better get treatments to patients, please let us know, and we're happy to pass those along to the bill sponsors. Thanks very much for having me today.
Hi, everybody. I want to thanks to John for that great presentation and survey of the current landscape of what's happening in Congress. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening on the administration side, particularly for this audience, where we are with the establishment of the new ARPA-H. Many of you are familiar probably with DARPA, which focuses on, high risk, high reward defense research. And so ARPA-H is going to follow a similar model, but in the health space. So most recently, just this spring, Biden has requested $6.5 billion for this new agency over the next 3 years. That's very similar to DARPA's current level of funding. And the goal of this new organization is going to be to make what they're calling pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies, and looking for investing in research that has the potential to really transform medicine and health for all patients, and the type of research that can't necessarily be accomplished through traditional research like we're seeing at NIH, or through commercial work. The goals of this new organization will be to build new capabilities and platforms to really change how we approach prevention and treatment and cures throughout a wide spectrum of diseases, to take current ideas and tangible solutions for patients, and really expedite their progress and their delivery to patients in a way that we haven't seen. And to foster breakthroughs across all levels of science, and to overcome market failures through what they're calling critical solutions. So I think a lot of conversations happening right now around how will this be linked to NIH, not be linked to NIH. What we're hearing is that it will have a linkage to NIH, but it will not be its own IC or institute. But that it would draw upon the resources that NIH has available, but maintain a unique culture in its own organization. And by that, I think they mean they're looking to be very nimble. They're looking to fail early and fail often, and really be able to get at some of these disruptive or breakthrough technologies that we haven't been able to fund through NIH. So the structure would be very similar to DARPA. It would be flat. It would be term limited. So program managers would have terms, projects would have a time limit. So you wouldn't see these kind of years and years and years long research projects like you see at NIH. I know they want to consider equity and inclusion throughout the programs, and kind of modernize a bit in a way that some folks feel has not been happening at NIH. And the current, I think, big question is where will this be located? Will it be part of the NIH campus in Bethesda, or will we see this located elsewhere, and perhaps a tech hub like Austin? They've been talking about Raleigh, Boston, Nashville, to really have a separate sense of self away from NIH. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House have really been the architects of this initiative. They have been holding listening sessions, as John mentioned with cures, kind of the same thing, soliciting feedback, and I think really trying to establish buy-in from the scientific community for the creation of this organization. Excuse me. Briefly, I just wanted to talk, quickly about a couple of other priorities in the Biden health and science space. I mentioned equity and access being a focus area in the creation of ARPA-H. That is really a focus area that cross-cuts all of the initiatives in his health space. COVID has really laid bare the inequities in our system and the disparities that we're dealing with. So I think the government has opened their eyes and have finally declared that this is something that needs to be addressed. And in that same vein, making sure that policies are patient-centric and that our system revolves around getting cures and breakthroughs in the hands of patients. It's wonderful to have them, but if patients can't use them, it really doesn't do us any good. We are in the midst of a cancer moonshot reboot. We don't know exactly what that will look like. Currently, it will sit within OSTP. There has been talk about broadening it to several other diseases like Alzheimer's, like diabetes, and expanding that focus. So we should know more within the next couple of months as they start to staff that up. And just to close out here, really making sure with all of these efforts, whether we're focused on cancer, Alzheimer's, et cetera, that we're really using all of our agency capabilities and engaging everyone who has something to contribute. I think that's something that Biden learned and saw during his time at BP, is that, we have a lot of capabilities across our federal government, and we're not always utilizing them in the most useful or productive way. So making sure that we are engaging all our whole federal agency workforce in some of these health issues. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Liz. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for such a thorough overview. So real quick, just want to talk about the different sources of funding. When people say they got government funding, it's really only 4 ways. 1 is legislation, 2 is grants, 3 is discretionary contracts, which is often when they have extra money at the end of the fiscal year and they need to spend it or lose it. Or perhaps they grant applications came in, they didn't quite meet the criteria, so now they've got extra funds. So a lot of that relies on the relationships you can develop with program managers. 4th is procurement, which is just straight up contracts. Ideally, you're on the spectrum and you get funding while you're in that R&D stage, you develop it through with the government, and then they buy it from you. That is the ultimate. As you can see with this lovely pie chart, Department of Defense gets by far the most money, which is why we're going to focus a lot today on DoD funding. Next slide, please. So John covered a lot of this. We've got the annual appropriations process, 12 appropriation bills have to get through Congress. It's a moving train, so we jump on it regularly. We constantly add different initiatives, directives, funding lines to benefit the biosciences and direct certain research efforts. And at the end, I'm going to close out with some case studies that summarize nicely some of these, some examples for you. So you can see there's a lot of different categories that might be of interest to biosciences. To look for adding lines or to see where departments are going to be pulling through funding to spend on different bioscience R&D initiatives. Earmarks are back, but only for nonprofits. So you'd have to partner with a nonprofit for a bioscience company to access that. Directive language, that's always been a possibility, and would love to, we can talk further one-on-one on that, or if you have questions on it. NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act, as John talked about, there's also lots of opportunities to insert language in there, directing DoD to spend funds on certain health initiatives or bioscience research efforts. Other legislative issues of interest. Next slide, please. These lists all the grant opportunities or the grant websites. And so again, we'll send out the slides so you can look through it yourself later, but in the interest of time, let's just keep powering through, and then I'll pass it over to Greg.
Great, thanks a lot, Liz. So as we start to talk about grant funding opportunities, wanted to just put this up on the screen as a reminder that we do publish a government bioscience grants report every month. And there's a URL here where you can sign up to get that, but also wanted to make sure that everyone's aware that if you're not familiar with us or this is your first time, we saw a lot of new faces and names sign up for today, so welcome. We do a monthly highlights call and screen share where we actually walk through the report and answer questions about applications or just the whole process in general, but it's also a great opportunity to highlight the new funding opportunities that are available for bioscience companies. And so this call and screen share takes place every third Friday of the month from 10 to 10:30 Eastern time. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just wanted to start talking about some of the key federal departments to target. A lot of folks are very familiar with NIH, so I don't really want to spend a ton of time there. The company was actually our firm. Liz founded the firm back when she was talking with a number of companies trying to access money, and they were actually kind of discouraged by the whole NIH process. It's hugely competitive. The SBIRS TTRs, they're a heavy lift for very little return. Same for any of the R01 grant opportunities. So absolutely, you should be looking at those and going after those. Our approach would be to meet with or talk with those who are running the programs to see if applications are a fit before actually doing that investment of time in there into putting together a proposal just because of the return on time. But did want to mention some others here, make sure that they're on everybody's radars. The first is BARDA, which you've probably heard in the news within the last year. BARDA had been center stage for some time related to the COVID crisis, and this stands for the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And they are all about medical countermeasures to address man-made or natural threats or attacks against our country. So obviously the natural ones would be diseases, illnesses, things like that. And then there are other countermeasures related to attacks against the country. Within BARDA, they've got a broad agency announcement that is applicable. You can apply for that. Right now, it's still been pretty much focused on COVID. But there are these other opportunities through BARDA, like DRIVE, which is the Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures. And then kind of within this whole structure, there's this early notification to act, control, and treat, which is the ENACT program. And that really aims to provide health information to individuals, medical care providers, just really in the early stages of an infection, ideally ahead of noticeable symptoms. CARB-X is all about accelerating global antimicrobial innovations. So that is a potential opportunity. And then there's also other things. There's obviously they've been focused on the COVID-19. They've got a particular niche around sepsis. There's also a program beyond the needles, which is developing alternative vaccine technologies to make vaccinations and therapeutics easier to administer and more widely available. So we just really want to touch on a number of these just to kind of give you a flavor of all the different funding streams or mechanisms that you could be looking at. One that really kind of goes unnoticed a lot with some of the companies that we work with and come across is the National Science Foundation. And they've got an America's Seed Fund program that's really all about transforming your innovations that can make a difference. And high risk, has some market pull and scale, but the nice thing about the NSF America's Seed Fund is that it's a really pretty easy lift for especially early stage smaller companies. There's a 3-page project pitch, and you will actually get notification. You'll know within 3 weeks whether or not you meet the program's objectives. So it's a nice way to look for funding, and they've got 24 different areas of interest that range anywhere from advanced manufacturing to biomedical technologies, digital health, IT, medical devices. They've also got pharmaceutical technologies all the way up to wireless and everything in between. So there's a total of 24 different categories, and they've got a ever convenient other topic that if you don't fit into these others, you can always submit to the other topic. So we just always want to make sure that companies are aware of NSF. They also have the early concept grants for exploratory research. And so this is early stage research on untested but potentially transformative types of technology. So always one to kind of take a look at as well. They've got the RAPID program, which looks at really kind of this urgency in getting proposals done very quickly. And then there are other departments like DOE. We've talked about DARPA earlier, which is a name that comes up often. And with DARPA, it's all about the high risk, high reward. But when we have had some recent conversations with program managers over there, it's not about building a better mousetrap. So if you're coming to them with, hey, I've got this really great idea that's going to improve X and it's going to make it better, they're really not interested in that. They want what's not being done. And so pie in the sky, where can we go? Hasn't been done before types of things. I did want to mention, and then so within DARPA, there's some broad agency announcements, and DoD has some program announcements that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And also within the Air Force is this AFWorks program, which has again, a nice, easy lift for companies that may not have the resources to do a full SBIR or anything like that. But they require like a slide deck, and you can apply for $50,000 for a phase one. And essentially what you're trying to do with that phase one is then find an end user within the military where you can go for additional money up to like 1.5 million. And so in the case of AFWorks, it's really helpful if you already have connections within the DoD. And we'll talk more about that, of ways that you can start to penetrate and get in and talk with folks and how to connect with them. I will mention that we've got the VA pilots on here. If you've got FDA clearance for healthcare items if you've got FDA clearance on products and haven't worked with the VA before, there are opportunities to do some pilot projects with them. As far as research dollars, it's a little bit tougher to get research dollars from the VA. A lot of that is intramural, but you could always partner with them internally. And we're going to talk more about that as things go along. The conferences, those are here just as a resource. We're going to really go into the MHSRS conference here in more detail in just a few slides. So let's go ahead, Katie, to the next slide. This one is really just intended to give you a sense of the scope and the breadth of the military health system. And again, keep in mind that pie chart that Liz mentioned, that the DoD gets the bulk of the funding when it comes to some federal dollars. And you can see here that within the system, within the military health system, there are over 9 million beneficiaries and hundreds of locations, including military hospitals and medical clinics. And just within the VA alone, they've got these 23 veterans integrated service networks, and those are by regions. And I've got a map of that for you later that will be a resource. If you are doing any work with the VA, you can kind of see where your region is. But also within the VA, they've got some medical centers, community-based outreach clinics. And if you've got, and they're really tend to be interested in IT related issues, improving hospital care, rehabilitation, and like I mentioned earlier, pilot projects. So as we start to kind of look deeper into the DoD realm, be thinking about your technology, your offerings, and how it can meet military medical gaps. And you'll see some of those gaps listed as we talk about MHSRS, but just to kind of plant some of those seeds. They're really interested in wound care, far forward and point of injury care. And so as you talk to more and more DoD folks, they're really expecting that within future conflicts that it's going to be with near peer adversaries, which means our country won't have the ground or air superiority that we've had in the past. And they often talk about the golden hour and getting injured warfighters off the field or care within that hour. And in these new environments, they're expecting that they may not be evacuated for 72 or more hours. So if you can get your technologies to the point of injury or as close as possible, they're very interested in that. Obviously, austere environments, but in a kind of a bigger picture way, they're interested in regenerative medicine. What can we do to get injured warfighters back to duty, burn care, TBI, things like that. And you'll see a list of those as we start talking more. So let's go ahead and go to, let me see here real quick. We talked about key areas of interest. Okay, yeah, let's go to the next slide. So just some basics with the Department of Defense and prioritizing R&D funding. It's helpful to know that there was a recent reorganization that really kicked off back in 2017 in the National Defense Authorization Act. And you'll see the common thread here that all of the stuff that John and Katie talked about with Congress really ties into how the money is allocated within not only DoD, but NIH. And so if we know how that money flows, there's also opportunities to impact that earlier on in the process. But related to this slide, the Defense Health Agency is really in charge of kind of the joint operation among the Army, Navy, Air Force, and medical services to provide a medically ready force in providing those health services. The Army's Future Command is really kind of about modernizing the Army and all of that goes into running that. But so we've seen some consolidations of military treatment facilities, and that's really been the largest shift. And so we've, with that shift, even though it started back in 2017, we're still seeing kind of how all of that money ties together with DHA and how it then flows to Fort Detrick and to USAMRDC, which manages and executes research in 5 basic areas. And they essentially cover military infectious diseases, combat casualty care, operational medicine, chemical biological defense, and then clinical and rehabilitative medicine. It's a pretty diverse portfolio, and it covers vaccines, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, medical equipment, and information technology. And USAMRDC works closely then with Army Medical Logistics Command to then get this out into the battlefield. And I saw a question pop up, is the Rapid Innovation Fund back? And it is not back. It has been, that is an opportunity that has been very nice in the years past. It was not done last year and it was not renewed in 2021. Looking at this list here under the basics, cooperative research agreements, or CRADAs, cooperative research and development agreements, really want to highlight those and just mention, and I realize I'm probably getting way more into the weeds than we need to, but want to highlight that these are great opportunities to work together, get your foot in the door. It doesn't necessarily come with money, but we've worked with some companies that out at the Institute of Surgical Research, they've done a material transfer agreement where they have agreed to give the military material to test it in experiments that the company couldn't afford to run on their own. So they're actually getting their product tested. We've got another company working with the Air Force on some benchtop testing of medical devices, and then using that to train residents in vascular procedures. Again, it's not giving the company direct money, but it's allowing them to collaborate with these researchers, get access to military government labs, and do some work that they might not have been able to do on their own. So CRADAs are a really great opportunity to do those. Let's go on to the next slide in the interest of time. This is just a quick visual of the different VA centers and regions that I mentioned earlier. Let's go to the next slide. So MHSRS, what is it? It's the Military Health System Research Symposium. Liz mentioned this earlier in the call. This is the premier, the largest DoD military conference of the year. Registration is now open. Kind of new this year, they've got their own portal, so you want to be sure to go to this https mhsrs.net at the bottom of the screen. The conference takes place August 23rd through 26th. And it specifically focuses on the medical needs of the warfighters. It brings together healthcare professionals, researchers, academia. Typically, there's over 3,000 people that attend. If you've ever attended JP Morgan before, it's kind of like a JP Morgan type event for the military. But it's all housed in one center at the Gaylord Palms. So if you are interested in attending, again, registration's open. It's $650 for all 4 days for civilian non-government attendees. And then if you happen to be active duty military, it's $450. And you can do one-day registrations for $435. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've talked about this already, being the largest military medical conference, bringing together private industry. Here you can see the different focus areas that they cover. I'm not going to go into those details right yet. I'll give you a little bit more flavor of that on the next slide. Typically, there's about 50 different breakout sessions. It's a great opportunity to network, get to see these program managers, demonstrate your technology, talk to them about it. It's too late to present a poster, but if this is of interest to you, you want to mark March 2022 on your calendars to submit an abstract, because they do invite industry and researchers to present either posters and or during an actual talk during one of the sessions. So you might want to think about applying to present next year and submit an abstract. So let's go to the next slide. I won't read through all of these. This gives you a little bit more detail on the different topics within the focus areas of warfighter medical readiness, and it covers infectious disease and injury prevention to expeditionary medicine and everything that's covered under there, including hemorrhage control and burn injury, performance for optimization, return to duty, and then there's some additional sessions on COVID-19. So from this list, as you get the slides, this will really help you kind of ferret out what might fit with what your company is working on. And then lastly, wanted to talk about, let's go to the next slide, Katie, please. Just some quick tips for making some submissions for the DoD. Definitely want to learn from some mistakes of others, and want to make sure that goals, and that you look at the goals and the award mechanisms. Specifically, what are they asking for? I know a number of companies have actually tried to submit to a congressionally directed medical research program, and they submitted a clinical trial project when they weren't accepting clinical trial projects. And so kind of some time wasted and frustration for the company. So just really be sure that you know what the award mechanism is funding and how your company and proposal fit into that. The deadlines for the military are hard and fast. You miss the deadline, you miss the opportunity. So don't wait until the day before just to put your submission together. Really use the pre-application process and period, which is usually 30 days, to pull your proposal together. During COVID, we did see that the periods got accelerated to like a 2-week turnaround time or a week, but we're not seeing that anymore. So you generally, once they do a pre-announcement, you're going to have at least 30 days in most cases to start pulling your proposals together. You definitely want to make sure to create a budget that is commensurate with the award, and just be cognizant of that you're asking for an amount that fits within the funding levels. The next item about registrations, I can't stress this enough. I have seen so many companies that wait until the day of or the day before to start doing their applications, and then they find out, oh boy, I don't have a DUNS number, or I don't have a SAM, or my EBRAP account, I got to set that up for my PI. And one company recently, they tried to do an account over the weekend for a proposal that was Monday, and it's just not going to happen. So just be sure to have all your registrations in order before you do that. And SAM.gov registration, if you're not familiar with, is required to bid on any government contract and to receive grant funds. So you definitely want to make sure you have a SAM account in good order. There's an opportunity to do some homework. You can research the reviewers, especially for CDMRP. You can go to the website, see what institutions got awarded in previous funding cycles and who actually reviewed those proposals. As far as topics and funding levels go, this all ties back to the very first slides we talked about. Congress makes these decisions, not the DoD. So, there are opportunities to impact that and influence that before you get to the actual submission process, but it takes time. There's some runway to do that. You can't just walk in the door now and try to make those changes. Having a champion in the DoD is extremely valuable, and it's a good bulk of the work that we do here at G2G, that not just submitting proposals, but finding those people who are in charge and making the decisions, collaborating where you can. I've talked a lot about CRADAs. I can't stress those enough, but in the end, having a champion or building those relationships is so key. So I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Liz so that she can bring us in the home stretch with some case studies and final tips. So thank you.
Great. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the point of this is if it works for another company, it could work for you. So I'm going to power through some examples. This is a cellular therapy company that was looking to learn how to navigate government, how to get funding, who to talk to, how to build those relationships. We took a close look at what they were doing, and they had some interesting partnerships going on with universities across the country. So we were able to do a multi-state, multi-pronged approach, working with members of Congress and agencies. And in those days, we were able to secure earmarks. And we started with just $1 million and then kept building off of that, a couple million. And as you can see over time, we got quite a bit of money for the company. A lot of it developed from relationships by basically giving our word and sticking to it. I think that's really, really important. I've heard from program managers that they are very frustrated when companies are not easy to work with. Because of those good relationships, they then introduced us to DARPA. We then got a DARPA contract. We did tons of tours and meetings and did some of that public engagement that congressional folks love. And then we made strong applications for grants, attended this military conference that Greg's been talking about. They even did an exhibit booth a couple years and really just networked the heck out of that conference year after year. And closed out with a great contract from BARDA, and that could be 100 million if all milestones are reached, but definitely secured 25 million. So it's a good example of patience, because this definitely took years to build up over time. And by the way, when I started, he was a one-man operation and he was able to grow. He merged with another company as 120 employees. So it's a nice success story. Next slide, please. This is an example of a company focused on tendon and ligament repair. They had some sophistication. They knew the DoD a little bit. They had one contact at DARPA, but they weren't sure where to go from there. And they had gotten some funds, but they were very restricted and they needed other funds. And so that's what we were all about, finding these other funding sources. So we introduced them to our contacts. We developed the relationships. We made sure that we were really aligning with what they were focused on. So listening is really important to make sure that you are aligned. We were able to go after both Army and Air Force funds. We tracked all these different opportunities. We kept telling them about them. We would position them in front of the program managers to get additional intel. We would then use that to make submissions. We found this one broad agency announcement that they had not heard of. We then used our contact to really narrow down to make sure it was the right fit. Met with that contact at this military conference and confirmed he wanted this, he wanted certain language, made that submission, and lo and behold, we got the funding. So we were able to get a couple different funding sources for this client. We also worked with some of these consortiums that have been up and growing the past few years, called ARMY, which is focused on regenerative medicine, and MTech, which is a new consortium over the past 5 or 6 years that focuses on a range of issues of interest to the Army in particular, but DoD wide. And you have to be a member for both of these to win awards, but they can be good ways to network to get more intel on what their priorities are within DoD for R&D medical. Next slide, please. Digital health. This is an example within the VA system of where a company wanted to sell their device into their digital health device into the VA and was getting blocked. And so we worked both the congressional side and the VA central side to explain why this was needed, why the veterans wanted it, the improved patient outcomes. We then snuck some language in legislation. It wasn't really sneaking. We told them that we were going to do this if they weren't going to cooperate. And then after we got that in, we then worked with the chair of the committee to then send a letter over to confirm they were going to make this fully available. So a lot of tag teaming between Congress and the agency or the department to make sure that this medical innovation was readily available. Next slide, please. Precision medicine. This is something that we're hearing a lot about these days, really important area. We were able to work with the VA in particular. They have a huge population, already electronic health record system. And we know that they need pharmacogenomics, they need molecular diagnostics, and it was just a matter of connecting the dots for them and directing some funds so that they could actually execute on that. So they wanted it, they just needed some funding to do it. So we were able to work on funding requests and directive language to tee it up for the VA to work in these areas. A lot of calls, a lot of meetings in person, some pre-COVID, luckily, met with the very top leadership within the VA to make sure that this was really aligned, that we were pushing what they wanted, that they would be very eager to implement. So nice example of significant funding resources coming in for the VA to use precision medicine tools. Next slide, please. This is an example of health policy that also created funding lines. So there were no funding lines before for rare cancer. There's actually 380 rare cancers out of 400. Most people don't realize that. And as we drill down and do more molecular diagnostics, we will find that the vast majority really are rare, that it's all about which kind of cancer do you have, what is driving that cancer. That's what determines the treatment you should get. And too much of our medicine is focused on the organ. And it is not about the organ, it's about the molecular driver. So there's a lot of education we needed to do. But once we did that, the doors were open and Congress started creating funding lines. We would tee up, write the language, tell them where to put it in the bill. And they started adding these funding lines, as you can see, for FDA, for DOD. We created new collaborations across the VA, DOD, and NIH to share information and make sure that we are advancing targeted treatment options, as there are very few for rare cancers. And rare cancers disproportionately affects those who are in the military, those who have served, those who are veterans. So there were nice connects there. We are also working on a authorization bill now addressing more precision medicine issues for rare cancer and all cancer patients. So if you're interested in that one, please let us know. John and I in particular are super passionate about this one. That is it for our case studies. Last slide is just some final tips. Knowing what you need funding for is really key. If you need to change a policy regulation, just really get your ducks in a row before you start talking to people. You want to be tracking opportunities. As Greg said, we've got our GBG report, Government Bioscience Grant Report, every month. Every third Friday of the month at 10 a.m., we go over the key opportunities. We do a highlights call. Join us on that. And then you want to reach out to your congressional representation. They are there to support you. They will find out about opportunities before it even becomes public. So you want them on your side. They can also make calls over. If, let's say, you make a submission and you didn't get any response as to why you didn't get the award, they can help you nudge on that. They can also help you get access to program managers. So they can really be your friends. They also can increase funding lines, as you've heard in those examples. That could be really key for your R&D. Write a good white paper, a one-pager, super simple, problem, solution, results. Really spell it out for a gatekeeper or a busy Capitol Hill staffer who's not a scientist to quickly understand what it is that you're doing and what you need help with. Calls, tours, all those are important. Going to conferences like MHSRS, taking the time to educate, build relationships, secure champions, and be a good listener and be resourceful. You want to be their go-to resource for your area of medicine. Respect timing and really make sure that you're a match in what you're applying for. And any insights that you gain from these relationships and conversations, use it when you make your submissions. Use those keywords. That's what they're looking for. Follow up, stay engaged, and never give up. And that is it. We'd love to take any questions that you have.
Yeah, Liz, so I do see a couple of questions in the chat box, and one of them was around they really liked our value proposition and asked if we take a percentage of the funds that we, so to speak, win if we help small businesses acquire funding. And we cannot take a cut like that because we're lobbyists. We cannot do like a contingency. Oh, if we get you X amount of dollars, then you pay us X. We actually work on a monthly retainer fee schedule that we work out with companies. So Liz, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but just wanted to make sure we answered that question.
Yep, it's called the Byrd Amendment. It's illegal for us to do that.
Yep.
So,
and then the other question was about partnering with the DoD. And yes, it's very valuable to partner with a known prime investigator or principal investigator. That helps. It's not required, but certainly we're all about trying to find that champion within the DoD that's kind of pulling for you and your proposal from the inside, rather than just kind of submitting blindly. So to the extent you can partner with people who are known or have, are already connected in there, great. That's awesome to do. Any other questions? We did have a question about, can you talk a little bit more about ARPA H and why that's important to bioscience companies?
Yeah, sure. Real quick. ARPA H is huge amount of money. That's way more money than DARPA gets. So number one, hello, follow the money. Number two, we've got a president who lost his son to cancer, as we all know. So he saw how frustrating it is to be a patient and to not have good options. And so he is all about making a patient-centric R&D, innovation-focused ARPA H. And so it is a huge opportunity for biosciences. They are framing things out this summer. We've been participating in a lot of their different discussions. There's some later today to help shape that framework. But I expect something this fall to start with this. And I think this is going to be a great funding source. And they will have OTA authority so they can quickly get money out the door. They're going to be, instead of being risk adverse, which is usually what government is, they are the opposite. They're going to take the chances. They know they're going to fail, but they want high risk, high reward. They want to address gaps in the system. So I think it's a huge, exciting opportunity. And trust us, at G2G, we are all over this. We're going to be tracking this regularly. We post updates on our website. We've got a cures summary on our website in our blog. You're welcome to check that out. We'll send that actually as a follow-up too. But yeah, this is huge. And Katie, if you want to jump in, I welcome that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's a unique opportunity to shape the priorities of a brand new agency. Which that doesn't come along often. So I think that's another wonderful advantage. And, that's something that we're certainly working on with our clients is making sure that this new agency knows what they're doing and knows where we really see room for innovative and breakthrough changes to our system. So it's really exciting. It's been something that's been talked about for years. And a lot of people were poo-pooing it, saying it was never going to happen. But it's happening and it's exciting. And it's in addition to that, it's just more money for things that might not fit inside the framework that we're currently working with. I think Liz said just about everything. So.
All right, there were no more questions. So I think we can go ahead and close out. Liz, any final thoughts?
Thank you so much for dialing in. We will send you a copy of the slides. We will send you that cures report, and we will let you know the link to the recording in case you would like to listen again, or you have friends who missed it and would like to listen. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.